This one's a movie that needs no introduction. Oh, right, this is a review. I'm not exactly sure if I'll add anything new to the table with this one, as it's probably the best known Lupin III media out there, and as such it's been discussed quite a lot. Still, I said I was covering all of it, so here we are. It was my introduction to these characters, and I'm fairly sure the same could be said for a lot of people watching this. Following on from Secrets of Mamo, TMS began work on a second Lupin movie. Initially, Yasuo Otsuka, who'd worked on the series since the days of the pilot, was set to direct. He wasn't up to the task, so while he stayed on the team, he passed it on to Hayao Miyazaki, who along with Isao Takahata had directed a large amount of the first series. Not to say we don't have some of Otsuka's fingerprints in the movie, as Lupin's Back in Green, which was done in Series 1 on his preference, and his Fiat 500 was based on Otsuka's own car. That one was more Miyazaki and the animation staff's idea. Production began in May of 1979, with the plan being to flesh out the story enough with co-writer Hayao Miyazaki to begin animation in July. Problem is, they were only about 25% done by then, but decided to move forward anyway if only to keep things going. Some elements of the plot, such as counterfeit money and a clock tower climax, seemingly came from episode 10 of Series 1, albeit fleshed out. Visually, Miyazaki drew from 1952's The King and the Mockingbird, Jacques Prévert and Paul Grimaud's adaptation of The Shepherd and the Chimney Sweep by Hans Christian Andersen. He also sourced his own work from Heidi Girl of the Alps, giving rise to his signature hilly landscapes. In terms of naming, Cagliostro comes from the occultist Giuseppe Balsamo, who used the pseudonym Alessandro Cagliostro. The original Arsène Lupin actually went up against his descendant Josephine. Not sure if she used Cagliostro III as a title though. Clarice, the name of the film's leading lady, likely comes from Arsene's first wife, who died in childbirth. Despite a tight deadline and having to cut down on some scenes, the film managed to wrap in November of 1979, with the release coming the next month. The Series 2 cast all reprise their roles as before, as does Yuji Ono on the soundtrack. Sumi Shimamoto voices Clarice, going on to work with Miyazaki as the title character in Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, as well as Maki in Series 2's final episode, also written and directed by Miyazaki. The villain, Count Cagliostro, is voiced by Taro Ishida and his henchman Jodo by Ichiro Nagai, both of whom would voice characters in later Lupin movies. In terms of English release, it saw two dubs, one by Streamline, one by Manga, the latter of which has Solid Snake himself, David Hayter, voicing Lupin. Yuji Ono still goes for a jazzy adventurous feel with his music, but lighter in tone and more subdued in places, fitting with the intended tone of the movie itself. This is best illustrated in the recurring motif Fire Treasure, which opens and ends the movie and sees various instrumental reprisals throughout. On that note, let's begin the movie. We open on a casino in Monaco as Lupin and Jigen make off with a few bagloads of cash. The casino's staff tries to follow, but their cars have been sabotaged. No prizes for guessing who is behind that. Lupin and Jigen celebrate their winnings, but Lupin soon realises it's all counterfeit. Well-made counterfeits known as the goat bills. Possibly gothic bills from what I've read too, but the subtitles and the English dub on my copy both say goat, so I'm going with that. Plus, goats are kind of a recurring emblem, but if you want to go with gothic, that's fair. Was likely supposed to be both in a bid for some wordplay. Anyway, with this in mind, Lupin decides on his next location. First step being to dump the money, and if you look closely you can see a certain scabbard in the back window explaining the origin of the casino cars being sabotaged. Found that one thanks to a Twitter post pointing it out, and checking for it in my copy. After a travel montage, Lupin and Jigen arrive at their location, the Duchy of Cagliostro. Population 3,500 and a black hole that's seen many figures disappear while investigating. They're stopped by a flat tyre, with Jigen losing the draw on who has to change it. As he does so, a car driven by a young woman in a wedding dress speeds by. This is soon followed by a second car driven by shady looking men. At this, Lupin springs into action. As they approach, Lupin declares they're helping the girl, much to Jigen's complete surprise. Jigen targets the tyres, but oncoming traffic initially prevents him. That and the tyres are made of tough stuff. Dodging a few grenades, Lupin decides to change tactics. He follows on by driving up the cliffside and navigating through the woods. Emerging ahead, Jigen tries again with a stronger bullet. He's successful this time, allowing them to catch up to the girl. Unfortunately, she's fainted, so Lupin jumps aboard her car before she goes over the cliff. A few more crashes lead to a car's engine falling to pieces and they end up going over anyway. Lupin has a grappling hook for such an occasion at least. She wakes up and panics, but Lupin calms her down and lowers them. Well, at least until the branch he's using breaks. Knocked out himself, the girl uses one of her gloves to tend to him. She runs upon hearing a boat in the distance. Jigen catches up as Lupin regains consciousness, who discovers the glove and a ring inside. Lupin drives out to a burned out castle that bears the same emblem as the ring. The sole resident tells them that a fire 7 years ago had burnt the place down, killing the owners, the Duke and his wife in the process. Lupin takes some downtime and looks over the ring, noting the girl's grown up. Jigen calmly tries to get an explanation as to why Lupin's so secretive, but doesn't get much. Lupin points out a second castle in the distance, along with the boat that was chasing the girl. They also spot an autogyro flying overhead towards the castle. The autogyro is piloted by the Count of Cagliostro, currently acting as regent. Jodo is on hand to inform him of the events that Lupin got involved in, as well as the girl's recapture. The Count approaches the girl but grows angry upon learning her ring is missing, possessing a similar one. Meanwhile, Lupin analyses his ring in a restaurant, translating the inscription as something being restored when light and shadow join as one, likely some kind of treasure. The waitress comes by, noting that the ring is of Cagliostro origin, looking like the one owned by Lady Clarice, our runaway bride. She's set to be married in about 5 days, and as Lupin flirts with the waitress, he spots one of the Count's men watching and leaving. Night falls as Lupin and Jigen continue to ponder the ring's inscription. They're attacked by the Count's assassin team, with neither of them doing much damage. They manage to escape, throwing off any stragglers. Meanwhile, a maid is exploring the castle, finding a painting peephole spying on the Count. She thinks she's been discovered, but it's just Jodo reporting back on Lupin. He finds a calling card on his back, amusing the Count. Goemon rejoins with Lupin the following day in preparation. Jigen also spots Zenigata in the distance, having arrived on hearing of the calling card, and also because Lupin let slip he was in Cagliostro to him. Zenigata discusses Lupin's presence with the Count, but is dismissed as the Count has his own guard led by Gustav. As he's escorted out, the Count quietly notes that he's got friends in Interpol too. Gustav warns that the castle is protected by high-tier security lasers and so not to snoop around too much. Having kept watch, Lupin decides the safest way is through the aqueduct. Lupin and Jigen manage to swim through, but the current pulls Lupin away too quickly. While overseeing a party, Zenigata notices a windmill malfunctioning. Lupin emerges at the windmill's source, one of the fountains, hiding when Zenigata arrives to investigate. Zenigata's investigation is cut short when he gets an order to withdraw. He demands an explanation but simply gets told to leave. Lupin then arrives in his favourite disguise and claims that Gustav just turned away, well, Lupin. Chaos ensues on the stairway between guard and police, but Lupin and Zenigata manage to break through. Lupin senses a trapdoor beneath, while Zenigata does not. Jodo sets the trapdoor to safe mode and then chastises Gustav for his incompetence. Too late do they realise that Lupin reset the trapdoor. The maid continues her investigation, with a hand grabbing her shoulder. It's just Lupin, and the maid is of course Fujiko, the two having not seen each other in about a year. She points him in the direction of Clarice's location, a cut-off high tower. Lupin climbs up and sets up a rocket grapple, planning to rope across to the tower. He drops it, then the steepness sends him racing down the roof as he tries to recover it. By some miracle he manages to use momentum to jump across to the tower. Clarice is inside, surprised at hearing Lupin's voice. He puts her at ease, theatrically introducing himself as a thief intending to rescue a princess as he returns her ring. His eye is on a far greater treasure, that being Clarice herself. She has her doubts, but Lupin assures her that he could fly or drain the lake beneath them if she believed in him. He then presents her with a flower and a bit of magician work. This is all interrupted by the Count and his men surrounding them and grabbing Clarice. He thanks Lupin for returning the ring and drops him through a trapdoor. As Clarice laments Lupin's fall, he speaks to her through the ring. He still has the real one and warns the Count he'll destroy it if Clarice comes to any harm. Jodo then dumps some water down the chute, but Lupin's grappling hook holds. He lowers himself down and discovers a wide array of catacombs littered with the dead. Spotting a light, he encounters Zenigata. With the two of them stuck, Lupin decides it's better to rest for now. Morning comes and the Count's assassins close in on Lupin and Zenigata. Too bad for them, they were ready. One of them tries to run, but Lupin catches him and takes his mask. Tricking Jodo, he pulls him down and traps him inside. Lupin and Zenigata emerge in Cagliostro's main printing room. Lupin explains to Zenigata that the goat bill counterfeiting has influenced the finances of many figures and events throughout history. For now they decide on a truce, even if Zenigata won't shake on it. Fujiko appears before Clarice, telling her she's getting ready to leave now that Lupin's here. When asked about him, she responds that she's sometimes a friend, sometimes an ally, sometimes a lover, and to watch for his charms, though she lets slip that she was the one to split from him prior. They're interrupted by smoke rising, coming from Lupin burning the counterfeit money. The Count's men investigate, but are greeted by Lupin and Zenigata racing out. They steal the autogyro, with the intent being to escape with Clarice. The tower's windows are made of reinforced glass. Lupin tells Zenigata to take control of the autogyro, and he enters through the window above. Fujiko holds the Count's men back as Clarice escapes. Zenigata's having trouble controlling the autogyro, trying his best to fly close enough to Lupin. As Lupin races towards him, he's shot by the Count and the autogyro is also hit. Clarice grabs him before he falls off the roof. The Count tells her to back away, firing warning shots. Changing tactics, he tells her to find the ring. Fujiko lets slip that it's under Lupin's collar. Clarice takes it and warns she'll throw it into the lake unless Lupin and Fujiko are freed. He agrees, but never intended to honour it. Fortunately, Zenigata's managed to learn the autogyro's controls enough to get Lupin and Fujiko to safety. Well, as safe as a flaming flying machine is anyway. Fujiko makes herself scarce and Lupin is picked up by Jigen and Goemon. Hoping the best for Lupin, Zenigata heads to the UN to report his findings on the goat bills. It doesn't go well, degrading into argument and accusation. No change there then. With no hope, all Zenigata can do is tell his men the bad news. Lupin is cared for by the old castle's caretaker, noting how odd it is that the dog Carl seems friendly around him. Lupin wakes up and learns that 3 days have passed, meaning they only have 1 day before the wedding. Filling up on food, Lupin finally explains how he knows Clarice and Cagliostro. He flashes back to his younger days, which give us some nice callbacks like his SSK and the famous wall run. About a decade prior, he was injured while investigating the goat bills. Emerging close to the Duke's castle, he ends up in the care of Clarice and Carl. Fujiko tosses a note through their window, detailing that an archbishop has been called to officiate the wedding. She also gives a call to Zenigata, informing him that Lupin will be crashing the wedding and that as Interpol's foremost Lupin expert he will need to head back to Cagliostro, to the chapel, in order to make sure to stop Lupin. The Archbishop arrives in Cagliostro, but a rock slide has caused traffic to back up. The caretaker arrives, offering a country road as an alternate route. Fujiko is also present, working as a reporter. Clarice has been drugged into obedience and the wedding begins. Lupin interrupts, propped up by Jigen and Goemon. As he calls out the Count for this sham wedding, he gets impaled by the guard. This snaps Clarice out of her trance, but the Archbishop comforts her, speaking in a familiar voice. The impaled Lupin is just a decoy filled with goat bills, and in the confusion, Lupin grabs the rings. Lupin unmasks with a fireworks show, and with Jigen and Goemon's help, he gets the chance to run. Zenigata enters, a man on a mission to catch and arrest Lupin. Clearly, Lupin has escaped into the altar's hidden stairway, and Fujiko follows with her camera to report every second of his capture. However, very unfortunately, Lupin is not there, but a printing press is discovered along with a whole bunch of counterfeit money that Zenigata just so happened to find, by complete coincidence, with a satellite newscast showing the world. The gang head back to the castle, Jigen and Goemon offering to fend off any pursuers. With both rings in his possession, Lupin realises the riddle means to put them together. An inscription along the rim, confirmed by Clarice, reads that light and shadow need to be set in the eyes of the goat that faces the sun. Lupin figures it out and heads for the clock tower. The Count has caught up, chasing Lupin inside. His men try and fail to get to Lupin, so the Count engages Lupin in combat as he's tampering with the gears. They do battle across the clockwork, but Lupin's knocked away. The Count follows Clarice out to the clock face. As he closes in, Lupin appears, offering the rings for her safety. The Count seemingly agrees, but fires the fingers from his gauntlet at Lupin, knocking him off the clock hand. Clarice charges the Count, pulling him off, but he stabs at the face to hang on. Clarice is kicked away and Lupin dives after her, shielding her as they fall in the lake. The Count then places the rings in the goat emblem, bringing the clock to life. The hands close in to the 12 o'clock position, but the Count gets caught right in the middle, crushed to death. The lake then drains, ending the fight as everyone watches. The true treasure of Cagliostro is revealed, a Roman city sunk beneath the lake. Lupin and Clarice observe it, with Lupin joking it's too big for him to steal. As Interpol finally arrive to clean up, Lupin tells Clarice he has to leave. Clarice tries to stop him, wanting to join him and become a thief herself. While tempted to embrace her, or maybe she's hugging him too hard and pressing on his gunshot wound, Lupin lets her down gently, telling her she's finally free to live her life. As Clarice reunites with Carl and the caretaker, Jigen and Goemon arrive and Lupin bids her farewell. Zenigata arrives just as Lupin leaves. Clarice tells him that Lupin's not stolen anything, but he responds that he stole her heart and needs to pursue Lupin for that reason. Bit of a cheesy line, but endearing nonetheless, and reminds you that Zenigata's ultimately pursuing Lupin as a mark of respect, which Clarice realises. He wishes her well and joins his squad. As the gang drive off, Fujiko rides by, having swiped a couple of money plates. The movie ends with Zenigata once again in pursuit of the gang. I think it's best to start with some criticisms I have, as while I do enjoy this movie, well, everything can have something wrong with it. I think the big one for me, something that's all the way back from the days of the Sci-Fi Channel airing I watched, is that I didn't get a good read on Goemon as a character. Sure, I pointed out that small detail in the beginning, but he seems to just be there as an extra hand in combat and not much else. Fujiko also has this problem to a degree too, but she does get to do stuff. Plus she shows herself as someone who knows Lupin better than anyone else, what with her locating the ring when he's shot and her conversation about him with Clarice. Kind of noteworthy that she mentions she left him a year prior, as it gives the hint that for all the hearts Lupin may steal, she's possibly the only one who can steal his. Let's just say that'll come up in the future. Lastly, Lupin's definitely a lot softer here than in other places, even down to his design being more rounded and friendlier looking. Not a huge issue, mind you, as Lupin's a character that can be interpreted in many ways. Just more gentleman, less thief in this incarnation. Certainly hope that people don't go straight to Secret of Mamo following this, expecting the same sort of characterisation, as they might be in for a bit of a shock. Positives come in quite a lot of factors, with the big one being pacing. From the start, there's no time wasting, establishing Lupin as a character, his plan to head to Cagliostro and his reasoning for it. From there, every scene moves the story forward and manages to do well in setup and payoff. For example, the money plant being under the chapel is something we know will come into play, as the wedding will be the climax. The level of detail seen in the scenery is also something to be praised, with things like the blemishes in the castle's masonry, or the gears in the clock tower and aqueduct, to name a few. One certainly can appreciate how hard the artists and animators must have worked to get this done at this kind of level with the time given. Seeing as I'm pretty sure everyone mentions it, I don't think I can get away with not mentioning the car chase scene. Miyazaki's always been good with vehicle movement, even dating back to Series 1. Compare the rather static repeated shots seen in the race in the first episode, done before he came on, with a short car chase scene in episode 23. The car there has a lot more movement to it, dipping and swerving as Fujiko's driving. The one scene here is that but turned up. I know I do these reviews in screen caps, so it's hard to show it that way, but there's a lot of movement, bumping around, and even things like pieces flying off that all add to the action. Not to mention there's a lot of good shot composition, showing what's needed when it's needed, as well as changing the viewpoint to effectively show off. An example being when they drive up high and deal with heading through the branches, even working in a bird flying through. Whether or not that comment from Steven Spielberg about the scene is true, it's definitely a good action scene to start things off, and there's certainly more great action throughout. While the movie was initially a slow burner, there's no denying that it's had an influence on many, both Japanese and Western alike. Great Mouse Detective apparently takes from the clock tower fight as an influence for its own clock tower fight, and I'm fairly sure Castlevania's clock tower levels also make use of it. Matt Groening mentions in the commentary for Bart After Dark that sliding off the burlesque house's roof comes from Lupin's tumble across the rooftops, and Breath of Fire 3 seems to reference it during the McNeil Mansion segment early in the game. Even the mystery of the two rings gets a shout out in the anime adaptation of Excel Saga, with the director Nabishin being a fan, Lupin cosplayer, and even director on one of the later movies. These are just a few examples off the top of my head, and I'm sure somebody could probably make a video on its own about the various media that reference this movie. Suffice to say, it's been an influence on a lot of things over the years. Probably goes without saying, but to wrap up, I'd say this is an entertaining movie overall that could serve as a good introduction to the franchise, even with my own nitpicks. As I mentioned at the start, this was my introduction and I was certainly entertained. Also glad to learn there was more than just this movie as time went on. Next time, we enter the 1980s era and Lupin in Pink with Series 3. Until then,